Well, we might kick things off and people can slowly join as they join. This session is being recorded, so if you don't want to potentially accidentally end up in the recording, feel free to turn your video off. Um, and before we begin, I'll introduce myself shortly, but my name is Tiana. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm the face behind all of the emails, not just the ones that you've got today about the events, but generally most of the NENA emails that have been going out in the last few months. Um, so before we kick off today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all joining from today and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I also want to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us in the Zoom room today or watching the replay of this session in the future. As we gather on World Localisation Day and talk about rebuilding resilient local economies and communities, I think it's important to recognise that Indigenous people across this continent have sustained very deeply localised, relational and place-based ways of living for tens of thousands of years, long before the rise of our extractive growth economies. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have very sophisticated systems that are grounded in reciprocity, stewardship, independence, and care for country. Um, and I think before we dive into today's session, something else that I wanted to just acknowledge is that I think is quite special about today in particular. Not only is it World Localisation Day, but it is the solstice. So for those of you joining from the Southern Hemisphere, it's the winter solstice. For those of you who are in the Northern Hemisphere, like one of our presenters today, Henry, it's the summer solstice. And I think that, for those of you who aren't aware, the winter solstice for us is the shortest day and longest night of the year. And this is something that I kind of see as a time of reflection and rest and renewal. And it's kind of a reminder that even in the darkest parts of our Earth cycles, there's always light that kind of brings us into this gradual return. And I think it's nice to be having a conversation about localization and transition and post-growth futures on a day like this, because a lot of what these movements are inviting us to do is to pay close attention to the place that we find ourselves in. And, this is the ecosystems that we are existing within, seasons, landscapes, communities. And I think in many ways, what a lot of these movements are kind of moving us towards is this idea of bioregionalism, which is about learning to live within the ecological and cultural realities of the places that we call home. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the term bioregionalism, it's this idea that human communities should live in relationship with the ecological realities of the places that we inhabit. So organizing our food systems, our economies, our cultures, and our ways of life around things like watersheds and ecosystems, climates, and those landscapes that sustain us. And the map that I've got on the screen now is the Australian government's kind of current map that shows the many bioregions within Australia. And I think what bioregionalism is asking us to do is kind of become students of the place that we find ourselves in and understand where our water comes from and what grows in our regions and what Indigenous knowledge exists in these landscapes that we inhabit. But the thing I love about the solstice is it's this kind of great reminder that while we all belong somewhere locally, we're all also connected globally. And so while we might be joining from different bioregions across Australia or across the world tonight, we're all also experiencing that kind of same turning point in Earth's cycle together, whether that's the longest day or the shortest day of the year for us. And so I think this feels like a really nice place to begin our first conversation in our Post-Growth Futures Week series. So over the course of the next week, we are going to be exploring what life beyond a growth-dependent economy might look like, and how we begin to build these more resilient, regenerative, and community-centered futures together. And I think beginning with a conversation about localization is great because in many ways, I think that kind of sits at the heart of what post-growth thinking and post-growth futures are all about. And so tonight's conversation is bringing together a wonderful panel of speakers that we've got from the localization, transition, and degrowth movements to kind of explore some important topics and questions. And so before I hand over to our first speaker of the evening, I'll just introduce myself formally. So my name is Tijana Jovanovic. I wear many hats within NENA, within the NENA sphere. So I'm a hub convener. I convene the systems change and the storytelling hub. I'm a board director. I'm a member of the strategic directions group, and I kind of do all of the coordinating hub activities and the admin. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with NENA, NENA stands for the New Economy Network Australia. And we are a member-led cooperative that supports collaboration, learning, and action towards a just and regenerative economy in Australia and beyond. And I love seeing in the chat where everybody is joining us from. We have someone from Tanzania. I always love it when we have people from around the world and not just in Australia joining us. And today's session is supported by NENA's Localisation Hub, which explores how stronger local economies, communities, and place-based systems can support more resilient and regenerative futures. And so if tonight's conversation does spark your interest, I'll share more just at the end of the session for how you can become a NENA member if you're not already a member of NENA, and continue this conversation through the Localisation Hub. So our wonderful panel of speakers that we have. First up, we're going to be hearing from Henry Coleman. Henry is the Director of Local Futures Australia, part of the international local futures movement that was founded by Helena Norberg Hodge. And his work focuses on localization as a pathway towards ecological sustainability, resilient communities, and genuine prosperity. Henry advocates for rebuilding local economies, shortening supply chains, strengthening community self-reliance, and challenging the assumptions underpinning globalized growth-based economic systems. We will then hear from Paul from Transition Australia. Paul is a qualified educator and facilitator who has more than 25 years of experience across schools, professional development, and group facilitation. He's a founding member and current convener of Transition Australia, supporting communities across the country to build resilience and navigate social and ecological change. And Paul is passionate about helping groups move from uncertainty towards hopeful, practical action through positive visioning, community resilience, and participatory facilitation. And then finally, we will be hearing from Tonié. So Tonié Field is a former internationally prize-winning ARIA award-winning classical guitarist who left academia and went rogue. I love this, into gender-subverting musical burlesque. So after COVID disrupted their university career and PhD, Tonié began questioning dominant ideas about success, progress, and modern life, leading them toward food growing, hands-on renovation, regenerative living, and the world of degrowth and systems change. So since joining the Degrowth Network Australia in 2022, Tonié has helped organise the annual Degrowth Festival and Degrowth Week webinar series, supporting community resilience and post-growth conversations in Naarm or Melbourne. And alongside their organising work, Tonié practices the Alexander technique, renovates houses, participates in local gardening cooperatives, and is currently completing a graduate diploma in regenerative agriculture, while helping to facilitate community education around AI and the meta crisis. What a wonderful group of speakers that we have tonight. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker. And what we're going to do is we're going to hear from each speaker, and then we're going to open up to a bit of a facilitated discussion between the speakers and an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll be collecting all of the questions and kind of saving them for the end. And with that said, I will stop my yapping and I will hand over to the wonderful Henry.
Thanks, Tiana. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm wondering, can we close the window so that then I can see people's faces? Yeah, thank you. Um, and if anyone feels inspired to switch on their camera, that's always nice. Also, no pressure. Um, I am Henry. I think many of you have actually heard my spiel on localization, the kind of basic 10-minute I do pretty regularly in order to introduce people to the concept of localization, to define it, to yeah, really just explain what it means because people still don't um there's still a lot of work to do basically in that arena, and that's what Local Futures does to in large part. So I will save that because I think many of you have heard it. And I think many of you are well on board with what we mean when we talk about localization. And the shortest definition of that I can give is to shorten distances between producer and consumer. Um, and so that's a process. That being a process, not like, oh, we must all just eat whatever's growing in our bioregion or our garden or 50 miles from home. No. In many parts of the world, because of globalization, if we said that we're all going to start eating locally right overnight or start getting our energy locally, we'd be um, eating cotton and burning coal. So it is a process. It's a systemic move in that direction. I'm sure you're all aware. I want to talk about what it means in relation to post-growth, which I think is an interesting term. So post-growth week, World Localization Day, what a lovely coalescence of terms that mean moving towards a life-affirming future. So I have my own queries with the terms around when we talk about growth because so many people think we need growth. So many people do need growth. Like I could put it that way as well. So many people need more money in their pocket. So many people need a better job. So many rural communities need more people, more businesses. So there is an economic growth that I think is needed and that I think has been stripped from us and is being stripped from us by a process of globalized growth. So there are two very different economies. We have the global financial casino, which is not tied to any real wealth, which is a hot air bubble. And we see that with the investment in AI and building of data centers, not creating any real need, really. I mean, obviously it is tied, global commodity markets do feed people, but they also destroy the soil that feeds people. And it's not tied to a real kind of to the real world economy, to actually how much money people have in our pockets. So much of the time, GDP growth has meant more and more wealth for billionaires while the majority actually get poorer. So, and then we have the real economy, the jobs that people do need, the work that does need to be done, the regeneration of the biosphere, and all sorts of ways of creating prosperity that are inherently local, connection based, the connections between people in their community. All of this is a form of real wealth that dominant global GDP growth has obviously eroded, but that we do need to grow. So I say this because we see a swing to the right all around the world. We see people saying, getting angry with environmentalists. How dare you care about that frog or that plant when I'm struggling to put food on my children's table and a roof over our heads. And so I'm going to vote for people who say we need to grow the economy at all expense. Of course, not distinguishing between the two very different economies. Um, so I like to go out with a message of localization is about growing the things that people really need. So if I were to make a list of things that localization could grow, it would be the number of businesses and the type of businesses that we have in our communities. So yeah, we want more smaller local businesses, less global monopolies, but a greater number of businesses. I feel like we can talk about that with people across the political spectrum. Part of that is plugging the leaks and import substitution. So these are terms that mean, say, in a community, we have a cafe or a local business that's providing some service, and that we realize that we need um, one thing that our community doesn't have is um, hardware that's being produced and sold locally. So we might diversify and create a business in that. Like, I'm not going to do that personally, but I think there are a lot of people part of the localization movement who are thinking in that kind of business growth way that's not about scaling up, but about thinking how to plug the leaks and substitute for things that we're currently importing, dependent on a globalized empire, our money leaking out of our local economy and going off to some distant corporate headquarters. How can we plug that leak and substitute that need locally, and create a business around that, or to create a cooperative around that, or whatever it is? Um, I believe we can actually produce more. So productivity. Um, in a localized economy, let's look at food economies. We can produce much more food per unit of land, per unit of water. We can grow more rather than having these monocultures, monocultural landscapes that lay barren for half the year, and produce one yield or two yields of a commodity that leaves our community. We can actually grow more different types of food and more food per acre through small scale, diversified agroecological systems connected to local markets. So that's a really important part of the local future that I envision is food systems that are not only more biodiverse, but really more productive. And if you look at any of the local food projects, you can see that this is a genuine productivity. This is a genuine growth. Um, and with that comes growing the number of birds and insects, growing the species on the agricultural lands, growing, um, yeah, literally, I feel like literally natural growth, if you know what I mean. Um, with that comes the connections between people. So how many people we know, how many people we have a conversation with on a day-to-day basis. In a study we often cite is in farmers markets, people have about 10 times more conversations with each other than they do in the supermarket. So growing the connectivity, growing the number of conversations that we have locally in a local economy, meeting that need that we all have, and this way in which we've all been impoverished in the global system, where our four walls have become ever more um, fortified, and we've become ever more cut off from each other in our community. So this is the reason, one of the big reasons why people start localizing, why people are celebrating World Localization Day today, is because out of a common sense awareness, we know that we've been impoverished in these real ways, and people are taking steps to get those needs met. Um, so yeah, I mean, even population, to address an elephant in the room with these conversations. Obviously, mega cities and these massive urban centers are overpopulated and have become a drain on um, the natural world, kind of inevitably, yeah. I imagine that we need to grow the number of smaller cities, smaller towns, and the population in regional centers, which are declining, throughout the world, Italy, Japan, Australia. Smaller towns are being emptied out, post offices are being closed down, being amalgamated. And all of these things are creating a natural reaction that people say, no, we want to have our communities thrive, um, and how to channel that impetus into a vision of sustainable, localized futures rather than into a far right kickback that says, make our country great again, is a massive political challenge. And so, Yeah, that's kind of why I've wanted to start with this kind of inversion of what we mean by growth or redefinition of growth. Post growth, I think, opens that opportunity because we're talking about what comes next. Um, of course, there's so much that we need to reduce. We know that the current growth model is being channeled into AI, and the expansion of technologies, which of course replace people, replace real jobs. I'm desperate to find some kind of activism that I can take when I come home to Australia against the data centers that are being planned for Melbourne and Sydney and being given the green light, no regulation, um, public land, tax-free invest, all of these economic mechanisms that are being used to favor that global AI-based growth model that destroys, that uses up our water, that creates very terrible jobs, minding machines, and destroys our real jobs. So the waste that this system creates, of course, the material throughput of shipping products all over the world, flying products back and forth, using chemicals and rare earth minerals in order to give people their daily bread when it doesn't need to be that way. There's so much in this system that needs to be reduced and cut out. But when it comes to the current political moment of this swing to the right and the need to create a movement that crosses left-right boundaries, I think we need that redefinition of growth front and center, um, rather than a kind of outdated um, rejection of an outdated pitting of the economy against the environment. That is an old story. And the way forward is one which unites the economy and the environment and says this movement, localization, post growth, is about creating more prosperity for people in their communities while reducing the outrageous waste and billionaire profits of the global system. So I think that's my message that I want to open up with on World Localization Day and at the beginning of Post Growth Week. And um, I don't know how long I've spoken for at all, but I hope that that's about time. Um, and I look forward to the conversation, and I'm grateful that you all care to tune in and listen to me spiel about localization again. Cheers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Henry. If anyone has any questions for Henry, feel free to pop them into the chat because I am keeping kind of a list of the common themes and the things that keep appearing. But we will hold our questions until the end. And now we will hear from Paul.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry. And thank you. Nice to be here. I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation down here in Naarm, Melbourne. And I'm going to do something a little bit different to what I would normally do because I've been doing this spiel for about 10 years or so. And if I were to be honest and to look at the environment now and the activist environment now, I can't honestly hand on heart say I feel like I've made 10 years of growth and 10 years of change in this space. So I'm going to do something a little bit different, maybe go off script and maybe even be provocative. So I wanted to actually start with a little story that I was told before I went on an Australian aid program to Cambodia. The short version goes that there's a bunch of educators who go to a small Southeast Asian village determined to bring the benefits of education to a village where there was no school. They did the research, secured the funding, got the professionals, made the plan, worked out strategic steps, etc., and were ready to go, but were fortunately interrupted when someone basically said, hey, listen, we have educational facilities here. They don't look like schools, so you wouldn't recognize them. Our actual problem has nothing to do with the provision of a school. Our actual problem is that during the rainy season, when it gets wet, our kids can't get to them because the roads fill up with water and they can't safely get to school. So the problem was not a absence of schools, it was an absence of footpaths. Um, that sort of, I think humans are amazing problem solvers, but the basis of solving a problem really powerfully is that you have to be asking the right question. And I think, whilst this feels like a little bit of a weird way to start this talk, I think that one of our problems is that we aren't really asking the right questions. I'm going to share this while I talk just to show people. Um, whoa. Yes, cool. So Transition Towns, along with a whole heap of other groups, has been working for ages to actually think about solutions, and there are lots of solutions. In reality, we have most of the, or a lot of the solutions to food and energy, transport, waste, education. Transition Towns was born on this idea of an oil crash, which never actually eventuated because of unconventional oil extraction, but it basically said, look, we are at a tipping point. We can either pretend everything's going to be steady, we can pretend we're all going to live in a Jetsons universe and have a flying car and a robot dog, or we can accept that we're heading towards Mad Max. Or the fourth option is we have this sort of let's go down the hill and help people. So when they need to go down the hill, we've already done the legwork. And this was the basis of transition towns and now what I would say transition culture. Um, but there's a bit of a challenge to it. Why can't I do this? Um, and the challenge is we've seen things get worse. We're seeing continued waste. We're seeing continued rise of things. We're seeing autocrats. We're seeing increased lifestyle challenges. We're seeing all of these things continue. And transition towns and lots of other groups have a lot of these solutions. Basically, transition culture promotes this idea of holistic, inclusive transition that's both inner and outer, that has not sort of Pollyanna, everything's going to be fine, but hard solutions to real problems, and looks at all those things. Stop my sharing now. So the question that I guess, and we know that actually these things existed. If we decided that we wanted to do them, we could. For example, if you look at divestment as an example, the ethical investing groups do just as well financially as non-ethical investing groups, and yet lots of money still goes into unethical investing. We have enough food production across the world to feed everybody, yet 10% of the planet is still in hunger. Whilst we have these solutions, I'm not saying they're perfect, but and they would improve, but it's a choice thing. We'd have to choose that we want to do it. So the question that I guess I'm going to pose is why aren't we? And one of the things that I think transition culture has that is a bit of a missing link is because whilst we have a bit of a crisis on asking the right question, but a crisis on imagining imagining the potential solutions. We actually have a crisis of imagination and a crisis of hope. Because the question we're actually trying to answer at the moment is how can we have a sustainable version of the status quo? And that sends us down to all sorts of weird solutions like, unlimited energy from nuclear fusion. And I'm a science teacher and a geek, and I love the idea of nuclear fusion, but it would kind of be disastrous for the planet because we would continue to grow, continue to mine, continue to waste, continue to consume. It's actually just about how can we have a greener version of the status quo? And it's not the greener that's the issue, it's the status quo bit that's the issue. So one of the challenges I think, and one of the challenges and the benefits or the suggestions that transition culture promotes is this idea of thinking about how can we ask the right question and how can we really imagine what the future might be and communicate what that future might be. Because otherwise what we're having is that idea of a monoculture, which is, very fashionable, or at least a one way to live and thrive, which then begs the question of if there's only one way to live and thrive, and I'm not feeling that I'm living and thriving like that, whose fault is it? And I kind of think that we're experiencing a little bit of that at the moment of somebody is stopping me from being able to live the way. Sorry, to the way it might be, the immigrants or the greenies or the socialists or whoever else. Um, and one of the reasons that comes about is because we have this singular idea of what our future will be like. It will be more of the same, but with more stuff, more consumption, more waste, more energy, more isolation, none of which is actually things that lots of people want. I think Henry talked about that idea of people having more conversations. Me and my family did a year avoiding plastic and fossil fuels, and our experience was that going shopping went from a chore to being an absolute joy when you could actually talk to the person and experience their excitement at having grown the food that they had grown. And that's something that actually our life would be much better if we had that. Our life would be much healthier if we didn't drive. Our life would be much more connected if we worked less and spent more time being creative and caring for people, old, young, uh, etc. But in order to do that and in order to move into that positive future, we need to have a different vision and a vision that we can communicate really passionately and really succinctly and really deeply with people so that we can, as a group, come together to think about that future. And I'm not saying that there will be one solution. Actually, we need all the solutions. And having the ability to connect and talk and disagree and find, but be excited and be imagining something that maybe doesn't involve continual growth, that maybe doesn't involve financial exchanges as being the basis, or GDP as being the way um, in which we measure improvement. Because somebody's already put in the chat, cancer's great for GDP. Being a stay-at-home parent is terrible for GDP, which is completely ridiculous. And yet we go along with this kind of, this is the way that things go. So to calm down and get slightly back on script, I guess transition culture, to introduce it for those people who don't know, tries to encapsulate all the things, and we call it transition culture because we actually don't care what people call themselves. What matters is not what organization they belong to. What matters is the change that they are bringing. We believe that we need to be more local. We have local solutions to global problems. We need to address inner and outer transition. We need to have resilient growth that keeps us open, grounded, active, and resilient. But the most pressing thing that transition culture is promoting across the board is that we have this crisis in imagination. We can all identify the things that are wrong, but we really struggle to identify what it would be like to live in a place where things were right. Not tomorrow, but maybe in 30 years' time. What would it look like? What would it feel like? What would you hear? What would you see? What would you eat? We don't have a good answer for what that would look like. And fighting against things that are wrong is exhausting. And I think a lot of activists find that they are feeling exhausted because fighting against this tide of status quo and things that are going wrong is really, really exhausting. So what we think is we need to spend more time thinking, talking, and disagreeing about the future and what it would be like. We need to write books, tell stories, have workshops and events like this, engage with people we don't agree with and people we do. And the more we do this, the more we engage with people in a way that energizes and engages individuals and communities, that the more we're going to build that vision of the future and then be clear and be energized to work together to get there. So that's kind of my thrust is that, and I actually I've got 2.5 minutes, well, 4.5 minutes rather. So I want to finish with a story because I am a teacher. I'm not that kind of teacher, but I'm going to pretend I'm that kind of teacher. But story has a real power in communication and has an immense tradition in Australia as a way to share culture. So I want you to share a story that I wrote 10 years ago. I've also got to minimize this because I keep seeing the chat comments and getting distracted. I wrote this 10 years ago, and it's a little bit of a magical journey, a little bit of fiction about the year 2018, where I'm going to take my magical time machine and I'm going to wake up for the first time. And I'd like you, if you want to close your eyes or just come with me, and I want you to see how this feels. So the first thing you notice in this strange new world is a sound, or rather the lack of it. You didn't realize how ever present the buzzing of electronics, the dull hum of cars, and the sound of civilization was. But now that they are nowhere to be found, replaced by the sounds of humans moving along the streets and the tweets of birds, oddly loud without the competition. Heavy curtains adorn all the windows, artificial lighting is minimal. The large wardrobe that used to house a vast array of clothing has shrunk to cater for a more appropriate and small range of locally made garments. You walk into the kitchen and notice the pantry has grown to contain a wide range of jars and bottles filled with preserves, dried produce, and vivid colours. A rustic table is occupied by 8 people, from babies to elders, and the family is being served from a large pot. Walk out the front door after pushing a heavy woolen curtain aside. Door feels solid, secure, and built for keeps, but it has no lock on it. It closes with a swish on its tight hinges. And outside, I'm instantly hit by the smells and the green. The air wafts with suggestions of animals, bread, jam, and gardens. There are trees, trellises full of vine, flowers, and vegetables everywhere. The street is, well, it's not a street anymore. It's a jumble of trees where asphalt used to be. Most of them are fairly short, but with some large nut trees holding pride of place and towering over like umbrellas. Underneath the trees, more plants grow. Some look edible, some look to just have other uses, but all clearly planned and well tended. Despite the density of the houses around me, the pace has a pace of quiet country town. You talk to the next door neighbour who explains that most people don't work in paid employment for more than a day or two a week. There are exceptions, he explained, doctors, nurses, teachers, and a smattering of other professionals who tend to work longer hours, even though the money is not great. Instead, he tells me looking after each other, wellness, and preparing the next generation to deal with the challenge that exists as a byproduct of the bad times are seen as callings, and those who work in those areas are supported by the community and given great respect. The rest of people work a little to supplement what they can grow, make, barter, or exchange for the little luxuries but they find they have much time to engage with neighbours and follow up on passions. Whoever would have thought, he says, that once we got rid of all the distractions by trying to keep up with the latest gadgets and compete with each other, we actually discovered that people work their best when they're not crushed by debt, which he explains hardly exists anymore. That's not to say people aren't doing amazing stuff, it's just that people have the freedom to follow their passions. Those who love the excitement of discovery undertake scientific research. Those who love words write, storytell, or code. Artists sculpt, artisans make tools, musicians play and teach, and people who love moving find time to compete in spontaneous sporting events. It turns out that eventually we realized our way of living was killing us, he tells me. Everyone was overweight, lonely, and feeling hollow. It took us a while, but in hindsight, it was much harder to change our way of thinking than to make the changes to our lifestyle. Now people feel connection, passion, and a sense of purpose. I walk a bit further down the road and come to a plaque with pride and clearly maintains that connects with the local and Indigenous custodians of the land and pays respect to them. I'm going to stop there because I am running, running out of time. But I just want to give you that sort of idea that actually we're all really passionate about things and the world has a whole heap of problems. And if the one gift and the one thing that transition culture can promote, no matter what your group is and what your group does, it's that we have this real crisis of imagination and we need to be talking and arguing and living and singing and breathing and sharing the future that we want, because once we make that decision that we really want to change, then the solutions will become really possible. And that's enough from me. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. And again, if anyone has any questions about that, feel free to pop them in the chat. And we will hand over rather to Tonié, who has a few slides that I will share for them. Is that working? You can see those?
Looks a bit it looks a bit small on my screen, but yeah, I don't know if that's for everybody.
That's as big as I think I can make it. So
Oh, is that big enough for everybody? Yes, no.
see the slide.
I don't know. Yeah, does that look good? Oh, yay, cool. Thanks, JP. Thanks, Rachel. Cool. Anyway, yeah, so look, I've got some slides. They're just there for a bit of a visual stimulus. Yeah, so How do I say this? So yeah, it's interesting hearing the two guests so far. I'm taking a different approach again. Um, so I'm going to talk about degrowth. And probably a lot of you have heard of degrowth. I'm not sure how many of you know like the real detail of it, and what it tries to do so that it can facilitate a transition in a direction that's going to be useful for us. So anyway, I'm just going to hit it with you. I'm going to hit it to you, and we'll see where we go. And hopefully, it's not too much information, but I've tried to keep it a bit fun. And yeah, anyway, so to start, not sure if many of you know about Nate Hagen's. Did a PhD on ecological economics. He's got a great podcast. I don't agree with everything he says, but he has a great way of understanding systems, and most importantly, as will become clearer later, in when I explain certain things about degrowth, he takes human behavior into account. So I guess I'm sort of looking at things in a little bit of a technical way and pulling things apart a bit so that we can understand the systems that we are actually in currently, so that then we can have an awareness of where is going to be useful to head, knowing all of this other information and knowing how the systems function that we're in, and so that we can avoid the pitfalls. We don't have much time, as Neil said in the chat. I tend to agree. But anyway, so Nate Hagen's take is that we have these pillars of our lifestyles. So they're underpinned by the Earth's biosphere, fungi, animals, bacteria, hydrocycle, plants, nutrients, blah, blah, blah. We have energy, which everybody's aware of. But energy underpins absolutely everything that we do. We need energy. We need energy to make things. We use energy when we go somewhere, when we consume a product that's got embodied energy. So energy is required for everything that we do. So there are the different types of energy that we use for our current economy, good and bad, whatever. And then we've got our materials, minerals, so elements, rock, sand, mining, steel, concrete, plastic, phosphate, nitrogen, etc. So a lot of that's probably pretty self-explanatory. Um, and so, yeah, just our society and our way of life and economic system in late stage capitalism is a result of how all of that interacts. So next slide, please. Thank you. So degrowth unpacks this interaction with wide boundary depth and critique so that we can, as I've said, better enable an understanding of the systems we are part of currently and begin prefiguring or like living in parallel a new life right now that brings our society and economics into balance with the natural world and is innately more thriving and convivial. Conviviality is a big part of degrowth. Often people get mixed up with degrowth and they think it's all about austerity and, just sort of cutting back. And sure, it is in some things, but in replacement of that, other things become much more fun and other things become much more satisfying. So you find sort of contentment and satisfaction in different things than what you thought. So examples of this kind of understanding of the system and wide boundary kind of thinking is the typical thing is like we all say, oh, we've got to be more efficient with everything we do. So like local food and all this sort of stuff. And that will equal less resource use. Not always. So what happens is something different, and probably some of you have heard of Jeevan's paradox. So what's happening now we see is because of the green economy, people are buying more e-cars because they think, oh, they're so efficient, I'll just get another one. And, I'm not emitting, it's like clean air and everything where I live. But they don't understand all the embodied energy in a car, in the batteries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why not just do without a car? Another example is green growth equals less fossil fuel and resource use. The reality is different. So if we're going to be using renewable energy and build that out in the future, that's going to take a hell of a lot of fossil fuels. Um, so, all the rebuildable energy that we have, so wind turbines, solar farms, geothermal, nuclear, whatever, they all take a lot of energy. And if we're going to replace our current energy use, which is 19 terawatts across the whole planet, there's no way we would. It's questionable even whether we would have the resources to even build that out. Um, and then lastly, so more technology and things um, equals more convenience and a better life. Yes and no. Some technology is good. Maybe the community should decide what technology we want, the local community. Do we want this newfangled thing that someone's invented, in the next bioregion? Not so sure about that. I'm not sure that's going to benefit our life. But we do need some because otherwise we'll be constantly chasing our tail for time and not have time for other things like art and science. Next slide. Great. Okay, so the degrowth movement of activists and researchers advocates for and works towards societies that prioritize social and ecological well-being instead of, yeah, we know all this, but corporate profits, exploitation, overproduction, and excess consumption. In other words, sufficiency. So enough is enough. I think it's that book by Jason Hickel. Um, but so prioritizing sufficiency rather than excess. And efficiency is really just is disguised. So excess is disguised as efficiency, but so more consuming to be greener, in other words. So the green growth idea. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but we can go back to that if none of this is clear. So I'm just trying to push through so we don't run out of time. Great, next slide. So our vision, like the degrowth network, we talk about a radical redistribution. So less energy and material throughput for richer people, i.e. the global north, billionaires, millionaires, corporate giants, etc., etc. We just do not have enough resources on the planet for that stuff. So an example of the radical redistribution is perhaps so access to land for people who cannot afford it, don't have access to it. There are ways of reclaiming land or sharing land to grow your food. Um, Access to useful technologies for everybody to share. So these are things like tool libraries, free bike hiring, free vehicle renting, community computers, books, education, blah, blah. And a lot of that sort of falls under the kind of gift economy stuff. Access to other needs and wants. So not sure if anybody's heard of offers and needs markets. They're a great way of making sure your needs are still met in a kind of a local community. We can talk about them, but mutual aid, food swaps, clothing swaps, etc. And then also free housing involving redistribution of the current housing stock for those who do not have access or earn enough money. Great, next one. So, degrowth requires a reduction in the material size of the global economy. We know that, right? We know we need, less globalization. It's just using so much energy, so much resources, so much waste. It's just excess, no end. But also, I think that we need, one of the things about degrowth is that we need a shift in the common values to go from individual acquiring of things. We look after ourselves, we earn money to pay for our own house, to do this, that, and the other. We pay for our own education. Instead, we emphasize values of care, solidarity with those less fortunate or who are not having access to the things that they need in their life to make a thriving life, autonomy, so a community makes its own decisions about what it wants and how it wants to live. and a sustainable prosperity for all. Sounds a bit like a lecture, I know, but hopefully this will spur off some ideas and get people asking questions. Um, so, achieving degrowth means transforming societies to ensure environmental justice and a good life for all beings within planetary boundaries. So, here I think transforming a transition, I guess, is needed, obviously. Um, and that shares something in common with what Paul was talking about with the transition movement. Yeah. Okay. And next slide. So this is a bit of a bit of something I threw in just to kind of what some of you may be asking right now is like, with the current oil crisis and, the world kind of currently, I call it in shitifying. Not as Yeah, like we're seeing things kind of fall apart in front of our eyes, and this is happening sooner than later in a lot of people's viewpoint. So what's the point in thinking about all this stuff? And these are all great ideas, maybe, and what Paul and what Henry have shared, they're all fantastic. What's the point of thinking about this now if we're maybe going to run out of time? Well, I think it's good to practice these things right now. Perhaps we should have been practicing them 10 years ago or more. The concepts and practices that align with degrowth don't just happen when disaster strikes. They take practice, skills, and perseverance. They don't happen overnight. So my way of thinking is that, you know, be part of a community garden, not because it's going to save you, and you're going to be able to grow all your food, but because it's good practice and you learn a lot. So that, when the proverbial shit hits the fan in whatever regard, similar to the oil crisis now, you've got some skills and you can share those. But they do take practice. You've got to get in there, jump in there and start. And it can be a lot of fun. So an example of things that take time and that we will need, things that take time to learn, are making decisions together through a kind of consensus. Making decisions together takes time. It's more complicated. We're not used to it. It takes practice. Good conflict resolution. There are skills around that. Very definite skills. Learning how to exist and cooperate with those you don't agree with about everything. And I think Paul mentioned that as well. Really important, given that we're in a cancel culture and Facebook, social media, blah, blah, blah. Learning how to look after and repair tools together, conviviality, so they last. So we do this together and share rather than just go and buy a new saw from Bunnings, etc., etc. Learning how to make things together, like clothes, bikes, shelter from your bioregion. And again, conviviality. So making it fun, bringing people together, share food, learn how to mend your clothes. We do all this kind of stuff in the Degrowth Festival. Um, Learn how to cook and share food together slowly. Sounds obvious, but it's something that, again, in the current economy, a lot of people, particularly younger people, it's Uber Eats, don't even know what the food is they're eating, don't know where it's grown, don't know where it comes from, don't know how much energy it takes to get there, blah, blah. Learning how to grow food together in a shared, whoa, what did I say there? Food together on shared land while having a community picnic and dance. So make it fun. Bring in the conviviality wherever you can. Um, and then the last slide. Is it the last one? Yeah. So I've kind of hit you with a whole lot of stuff. Anyway, but degrowth is kind of big. And that's probably its downfall in some ways. But so living in a degrowth way brings one closer to wrestling with what we need for our very survival and thrival. It's my little word that I like to use in a thriving way. So you're not just surviving, You're actually thriving through developing your survival skills with each other. And I think this is more enriching, satisfying, real, and can be fun. That's over. That's me done. How long was that?
That was the perfect amount of timing between the three of you. 7 o'clock is we wanted to kick off the Q&A. So well done, team. The collective hive mind has done it. Thank you, Tonié, and thank you to everyone. I think, yeah, I've been making some notes as everyone's been speaking, and some kind of things that have kind of stood out to me. And I think if I had to distill all of your wonderful ideas and insights and wisdom into kind of like a common theme that I think has kind of arisen, it's this idea that, when we talk about a post, not even a post-growth future, but this idea of post-growth futures, and there are so many, like, we need to recognize that there are so many possible futures that exist in a post-growth world. And like Paul pointed out, many of them, are possibilities that we haven't even imagined yet, or we can't even imagine yet because we're so restricted. And I think something that I got from Henry was this idea that, when we're talking about post growth, it's really this idea of like post GDP, or it's post quantitative growth, and it's more about that qualitative growth that we get when we focus on growing the things that we need for thrival. I love that word. I'm going to incorporate that word into my vocabulary, Tonié. And I think what a lot of this comes down to is all of the stuff that we want to focus on in the world of social change. And I often find this as a systems thinking practitioner. So often we want to focus on the policy and the legislation and all of the interventions that we create, but all of that is kind of downstream of the paradigms and the worldviews that we hold and the values that we have. And so that's, I think, the place that we need to begin, because that's going to be the most important leverage point for then everything else that kind of comes after that. So thank you all. I did see that someone had raised their hand. I think it was David. I'm not sure if David had anything he wanted. No, that was a mistake, David. All good. If anyone has questions, I think we can do it in a way that people can kind of come off mute, but I might kick things off with just a couple of questions for the three of you. And you can feel free to kind of answer them however you want to, or you can pass. But I think maybe a good place to start would be for the people who are listening, and they agree with everything that each of you have said tonight, but they feel a little bit overwhelmed by all of these big ideas. What is one kind of next step or first action that you would recommend people listening take? I'll open that to any of our speakers who want to answer that question first.
Well, I'll just do a slightly shameless plug for an initiative that Paul and I and Nina are involved with. We have localization sharing circles. Um, that's one way that I think we do this monthly on the third Wednesday of every month. I know some of you do come to that, and I love seeing your faces. But I also know that there are many here who don't. And so those are a very informal conversation way to share about projects, hear about what people are doing, connect with other people who are trying their utmost to localize in a system which utterly and profoundly makes that difficult until further notice. So please come along to those events, and it's a way to connect and chat. And then I'd also encourage that people do that face to face with whoever they can get a handle on, or meet up with in person in a face to face way in your own community, even if it's just one or two people, but make it regular, make it, sharing about the big issues as well as the whatever's happening on the ground in your own place. And that's the way that I keep my fire alive for this stuff, and I'd recommend that.
Can I jump in?
Hmm.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'd like to echo that. Yeah, I'm in Brunswick in Melbourne. Shout out to all the fellow Melburnians. There's been a local Brunswick group that has started to get together and just talk about the sorts of things that we will need. Again, given the oil kind of crisis, that's probably likely to be worse the next time it happens. Um, yeah, what do we get? Who's got these medications? Who's got access to, these tools? Who has these skills? Who knows how to this, that, and the other? Just starting to kind of have these conversations about, the kind of practicalities of what we're going to probably face in the near future. And just reach out. I mean, I know people who have just like walked down their street and dropped in a note into people's letterboxes and just gone, hey, can we have a barbecue and just talk about this stuff? Just get it out there. And it might be tricky at first, but you might not get much response, but you have to persist. Don't just be disheartened if you don't get a lot of response first. And it does take a lot of energy. Sometimes it's the people that do really sort of see things in a certain perspective that go, right, we really need to make this happen and put a lot of energy into it and push a bit to make it happen. So yeah, that's my two bobs worth. Just yeah, get your hands dirty, get started.
And I'll follow on because I think, quite related to that. I'm going to say that the first one is if you find yourself in a fortunate position where you have, lots of resources, divest is the first thing that you should do because it's an amazingly powerful and, you know, actually really beneficial thing. Um, but I also want to acknowledge that a lot of us, and myself absolutely included, are coming from actually quite fortunate spaces.
Yeah.
So my actual thing that I would encourage people is to find a place they feel comfortable and safe in and give themselves 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever you can, just thinking about like what is important to you and what would a future that you'd want to be in be like, who would you connect with? How would you not feel so isolated? How would what would you find fun? All those sorts of things. And then, because that it's important for the resilience and grounding and positive visioning stuff. But most important thing is tell someone about it. Walk to your shops and talk to your next door neighbor. Borrow a hammer or a cup of sugar, whatever it is that you need to do. But actually have that conversation because we have been taught that we shouldn't talk about serious things and things that make us passionate, and it's dumb. It is so nice to just have a conversation with a neighbor. You don't have to love them or have exact ideas, but even if they disagree, then take that as a like, huh, I hadn't thought of that, and just build connections because actually we're social beings. We want to be connected, purposeful, grounded. Those are the things that actually are most important, not whether you've got the iPhone, whatever it is that it's supposed to be at the moment. So yeah, get out, talk to people.
Wonderful. Thank you. Um, Another question before we open it up to the audience that I would like to ask is um, something that's kind of been coming up, I think, in the chat a lot, are so many of the challenges that keep arising for us as either individuals or organizations that are doing this work. And since you're all active, all leaders within your respective organizations and movements, I'd love to know what you guys kind of see as the biggest challenges that your movements are facing right now. And, in terms of overcoming that, do you see kind of the biggest task at hand as maybe something like actually getting out there and building those alternative futures, or trying to focus on that cultural change piece, or maybe the policy aspects? Um,
Hmm.
Easy question then, huh? Uh, biggest challenge. I guess as a leader, if that's what I'm supposed to be. I think one of the there's a couple of challenges. I think organizations are inherently hard work, and we're not great at asking for help. I think we are building lots of environmental activist groups on a structure that is built for businesses, and as such, we feel that we need to own, grow, etc., etc. And I think that's dumb. I think we need to be more like an ecosystem and help each other out a lot more. And if we aren't the ones who come up with the final answer, then great, let's buy the person who does come up with the final answer a beer. Like, we kind of have um, this feeling that we need to do things ourselves, and that we need to be the body or the voice or whatever. And I think that's just patently insane. So I think one of the challenges is that we are a bit isolated and we need to connect more. I think that people also need to connect more. It's really easy to feel like you're the only one who's worried about this. Whereas in fact, if we could take a satellite and put a dot at every household that is concerned about these things, Australia would be a light. But yet I can sit in my house and think, why doesn't anybody else worry about this? And media would love you to think that nobody else is worried about this and just get you to continue to consume. So I think how we connect is absolutely crucial. And yeah, does that answer the question? I've kind of forgotten the nuances of the question, but yeah, I think we really struggle. That was it. We really struggle to get out of this is there's a solution and this is there's a problem and this is the solution. There was a quote I read that was like for every complex solution there for every complex problem there is a simple straightforward solution that is patently wrong. And it's like we need to think about things differently because there are lots of options that work better for people, humans, not corporations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Paul. Sorry to jump in there, Tiana. Um, yeah, and I think that sort of jumping to solutions thing also can stem from not understanding the system that we're in. So, if people understood that, how many hands touch a product that is made that you just go down to the newsagents or the shop to buy, then they may think differently about a solution or a so-called solution. Yeah, I don't think there are solutions. All we can do is, get active, have fun along the way. Hopefully, I think a lot of these conversations can be very sort of serious and everything, and it is serious, but there has to be room for us to be able to dance on the way down. I think, you have to make time for that. You have to, I mean, that's with the festival. We always make time for dance. We always have some music. It doesn't matter how crap things get, we'll need that. But I think one of the problems that we are facing in the degrowth network is I think is time, like people bow out at times and they come back in, life gets in the way. Yeah, that's probably one of the main things. There's quite a few people in the group who work less on purpose to, to sort of spend time on activism and building community and just really prioritizing the important things. And not everybody can do that, I know. But, even with all of that, even with those people who are sort of like the core group of the degrowth network here in NAM, it just tends to be slow going, but I guess you can just you've just got to try and you've just got to like not be sort of like fixed on we're going to do this, we're going to make it kind of thing. I'm a firm believer that things are going to collapse gradually, and we're already in collapse, and that's going to be really hard. But you're going to be better prepared if you start doing stuff now rather than just going, oh, bloody hell, I'm just going to go on my overseas holiday and blow it all. and bugger it. Do you know what I mean? That's my two bobs worth. I'm a bit of a practical person. So yeah.
Can I jump in? Well, someone's holding up a drawing which I'm not seeing properly because it's blurring it because of your background thing, but it looked like a nice drawing. So feel free to hold that up. Um, I think that the biggest thing that's stopping people uniting against a system that's damaging us as well as the planet, not separate, we're all suffering, right, left, black, white, gay, straight, we're all suffering because of this system. What's stopping us coming together and demanding the policy change that would lead to a new economy and that would be able to harness all of the effort and energy that Paul pointed out with the lights across Australia? I think there is a cultural turning. I think people do want a more beautiful future that is more local. What's stopping that from coalescing into a movement for policy change that would create the structures and infrastructures that would make that a reality? A very divisive political conversation, a very divisiveness, social media algorithms that keep people clicking things that make them angry, hating on other people, thinking that if this person doesn't see things in exactly the same way, then they're a lost cause. And um, I also started this presentation with a discussion about what's the most inclusive language, how can we talk to people who care for their jobs and their community prosperity more than they care about emissions or who have been siphoned into some um, divisive conversation about conspiracy theory or whatever it is. How can we build bridges? Um, Localization projects are really good for doing that experientially. People who are involved in even a local post office where they might meet immigrants that they're otherwise not in contact with or other people that they think are bad or the problem, those projects heal those divisions. And so I think there's inherent value in um, making more and more opportunities for people to come together. Yeah, not necessarily because you're going to feed yourself at your community garden, but because you can create the connections, the social fabric that are our organ of resilience. Um, and whatever we can do to not feed into this kind of into the polarization and divisiveness that's happening right now, which is obviously the prime divide and rule, divide and conquer mechanism that this system, with all its sophistication, is using to stop us from coming together. So maybe one thing that we can all do is to try and have a conversation with someone that we disagree with and find out on something that could become inflammatory, but find our common ground. And that's why, and build a bridge. And that is also why I've committed myself to the language of um, localization or local economies rather than a kind of more ideological, inflammatory words like capitalism or socialism or left or right. I really believe in the value of that kind of diplomacy between people at this point, and I think we could get a lot further with that approach.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So Kirsten has asked, I think this is a nice kind of follow on from what you were saying. Do we know how we can bring the majority of people onto this path? And I guess that kind of opens up a broader avenue of discussion for, do you think we need to bring the majority of people on this path? Or I can see Tonié is already shaking their head. Is this something that we only need like a small kind of group of people to kind of focus on before we reach that kind of critical like tipping point where we're kind of forced in that direction? And in talking about kind of doing this in a way that is inclusive of everyone and we're not wanting to alienate or isolate people who might have different political views, do you guys think that the localization and the transition and the degrowth movement can remain politically neutral? do you think that it needs to be done in a way that maybe transcends politics, or do we have to do it in a way that gets political, but maybe, in a way that is as inclusive and strategic as possible? I'd love to kind of extend Kirsten's question to touch on some of those
Last
themes.
option.
What was that?
The last option, option C that you gave just
Okay,
now.
so you think we have to engage with politics and
I
get
think we are
political?
political, stay political, but yeah, like I say, try and not be divisive in
Mhm.
Yeah,
that. And I think I just meant to put my vote for option C, but Tonié, you had unmuted first.
Oh, sorry. Um, sorry. Yeah, just to answer the bit of that question directly, I don't think we need a majority of people. Um, the dynamics of social change has been written about. I can't remember some of the authors, um, but yeah, you only need a critical mass of a certain amount, and the social tipping point will be kind of reached. But, who knows whether we'll get there. That's a lot of people still that we need to get to see these different ways of moving forward. But I'm a bit of a, what do you call it? Like a, I'm like a, oh, how do you say it? Like a pessimistic uh, optimist. If that makes sense. Like I don't think we're gonna get there, so to speak. And I know that's not really what we're talking about, but I just think that's a little bit of a waste of energy, I think. I think we're just still better off just focusing our energy on, look, stuff's gonna happen and we're way too late and we've just got to give it our best shot. I think it's our duty to do that. I think we just, obviously, nobody here just wants to throw their arms up and say, "Oh, I give up. Let's just have a big party and watch the world destroy itself." I don't think anybody here wants to do that, but I think it's kind of almost our moral obligation, I think, as living beings on this planet and custodians of the land. And we owe it to every living thing on this planet to say, hey, give it our best shot here. And there's other people that have a very different view and think it's going to be a lot of fun. So who knows?
I might let
I'm
Paul answer and then I'll let you speak, Kirsten.
I'm slightly terrified by your questions, I've got to say. I actually started writing them down. It's like, oh my God, she started at like take everyone with us and finished at politics. Like, ah. I kind of think that you that the how we get there is gonna be different, but the what we're trying to get to and the why we're getting to, we probably share. Like actually, humans at a base level, connections, food, shelter, safety, love, purpose, like doesn't matter you're left or right or whatever. That's what we kind of want to get to. And I don't think that I think we should be open to all the ways of getting there. Like we should have a why, but the how we get there, I think we should be open. Absolutely. It would be lovely, and I think it would be great if we could try and take everyone with us. And I got to say that one of the problems, we haven't kind of got to problems of our organizations, but one of the problems with transition is it's pretty middle class, it's pretty white, it's not, degrowth does way better with sort of younger people than we do. We don't speak to everybody. Like since the climate activist march, the school students for climate, that there's been an absence of that really youth voice. So I think we owe it to everybody to try and be as inclusive as we can. And also, people have different approaches, and you'll get a better answer if you listen to everybody. But I think it's wrong for us to think that there is a split, a left-right split. I think we all kind of want the same thing, and we've got to try and work out how to do it. The other thing I'd add to that is that saying like nature bats last. Like at some point, we're going to have the change will be forced upon us. The more we can build the capacity and the resilience to do something about it, when we have to, the better. And you can see that in things like bushfire recovery. Like it doesn't matter whether you're a Labor or a Liberal or a One Nation voter. If your neighbour's house is burning down and they need help, you'll help them. Like actually, the more of that we can do so that we can help each other when we are forced to, when we don't have a choice, then the better.
Thank you. Kirsten, did you want to say anything?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for your comments and feedback. I'll have to think about all of that. So first of all, I have recently discovered through lifestyle medicine that all aspects of my life are impacting on my health. And I was drawn there because I was very unwell. And I think that's a way of engaging more people, because people are very focused on their health and their own like they should be more focused on their well-being, but we don't know. Like I have been concerned about my well-being forever, but by understanding this model of lifestyle medicine and how it helps, I've realized I have to stop doing the things that harm me, which are also the things that harm the planet. So I have an answer for you, which is lifestyle medicine, telling people how to heal themselves because they'll be interested in that. They want, self-interest is paramount, especially with years of education that you should take care of yourself with MyGov and UBank and all very narcissistically orientated marketing and information systems. And that we don't even know, we don't even realize, we haven't experienced the beautiful world that you guys are talking about. And so when I've been forced to experience it, even though I've been a greenie my entire life, I'm coming on board more because I really feel the impact on my physical and mental whole being. So that's something that I think could help. And I think in contrast, I am amazed how the right wing can get people to vote against their best interest. Like their marketing and because the whole system supports it. Whatever you watch on TV, everybody's dressed up in the most beautiful clothes. Oh, I want that. I've got to go to work. Oh, I need to keep working for the man. It doesn't matter if I don't agree with the values of this organization. I just have to earn money to house my family and all that kind of, you know what the system's like. Obviously, we all live in it. So when I say, like, my question is, I love what you're saying. I love everybody I've met through this community. I just want more of you. And I want more of us to actually push the boulder of change over, like you're saying, the tipping point. I don't think we've reached the tipping point yet. End of rant.
Yeah, if I may, I love that. I think you're spot on. That health is a really important avenue into this because we are nature. Our bodies are affected by the forever chemicals and the food system. And I think it's why we see, particularly in local food, a growing movement despite the fact that the economic policies that would really foster that aren't there because people are like, nah, I need this food for my health. But a lot of people come into this work into this movement through a health scare or a health wake up. And it's important. And it's also in the mental health arena. You know, we desperately need to be more connected, more community oriented for our well-being, and more connected to nature and have more purposeful work. It's key. For addiction, addiction recovery brings us people into this work. And so that's where the story about collapse, as some distant thing falls because we're already experiencing collapse, a social collapse, mental collapse, physical collapse. And so how it's like the cigarette addict that just keeps smoking through the hole in their throat that we see on those commercials. Like, at what point does the collapse translate into and I think it's messy. I don't I think it's already happening. I think we're already going experiencing collapse and responding. And that's why this movement is growing even when the policy environment is not favorable to it. And so I just really love what you said and thank you for saying it.
Mm.
I'm just going to add one little bit, and that's that the action is part of the solution. And I think I will never forget the day that my daughter, when she was 3 years old or something, found peas in the garden and sat there with a little pod of peas, taking each one and eating it. And the richness of that connection to land and that purpose and that care and all those things that are so empowering and so health giving is can be life changing. Uh, you know, it's
Mm.
why this stuff can be so amazing.
Absolutely. And I think so much of what Tonié shared tonight was about, once we actually get out there and start doing this work in our communities and we feel the benefits, then that's going to be one of the greatest kind of ways that we can build momentum in our movements. So we'll begin to wrap things up now. If anyone has any burning questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. But a couple of things. So Peter shared in the comments something, an event about food systems and health that might be of interest to people. So I've copied and pasted that, and I can send that to people. Neil also shared some great resources, and one of the things he shared in there was some resources from Ted Trainer. So I want to shamelessly plug that Ted Trainer will be speaking on our session on Tuesday about the simpler way. If that's something of interest to people. And the last thing I wanted to just share with everybody. So Carol also mentioned in the chat that she'd not heard of NENA or Local Futures or possibly our other organizations until just a few days ago. But she is familiar with the work of Richard Dennis and Catherine Trebek and Richard Dennis is from the Australia Institute, someone who's worked very closely with NENA, spoken at our past conferences. And Catherine Trebek is also a good friend of NENA. We did a film screening earlier this year for Reclaim the Economy Week, and it was all about Catherine Trebek's work in the wellbeing economy movement. And she stayed on with David Wood, who's also in the audience tonight, a NENA board member, to answer some questions. And so all of those resources that we have are on NENA's YouTube channel for people to go and watch for free. And something that we have been working on for quite some time that we officially launched this week is the NENA Sphere. I keep laughing at this because the term NENA Sphere was something that I just said in passing in an event, a webinar that we ran on New Year's Day this year, and people latched onto it and loved it. So we've run with the NENA Sphere. And the NENA Sphere is essentially our online platform for all of our NENA members to come together, connect, collaborate, congregate, and keep these discussions going after these sessions. It's also the place where you can formally join a NENA hub. So I mentioned that today's session was kind of supported by NENA's localization hub. And so you can join and become a member of NENA's localization hub in the NENA Sphere once you're a NENA member. And that's a great place where we can have all of those localization or transition focused discussions. And so if you are a current NENA member, you would have received an email from me on Wednesday evening about how to join. If you're not a current member, then you can become a member at that link or you can scan the QR code. But I would love to keep these conversations going long after the Zoom in the NENA Sphere. And I would love to see some more of your faces throughout the rest of the week for Post Growth Futures Week. I've been organizing this week. And like I said, it's mostly just been me. I've got some great volunteers who are going to help facilitate some of the sessions on the days that I have to work. But again, it has just been me. And so I do apologize for the little glitch with all of those emails, but I promise I won't be spamming everyone's inbox with Humanitics invites and things like that throughout the rest of the week. And I'd love to see you guys at some of our upcoming sessions. And once again, I would just like to thank our wonderful speakers so much for giving up their evenings, Henry giving up his time abroad to be with us today. So thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Tiana. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
really holding this space
Thank
and
you,
the wider
everybody.
hemisphere.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Go
Thank
well.
you. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you, Tiana. Thank you, thank you, thank you.